Michael, do you want to introduce yourself so people know who you are?
Yes, I'm Michael Johnston, and Innovation Director for Publicis Drugstore. I was brought in to give a practical application of some of the things they talked about, and now I've got to try and work out what that is. So hopefully I say something relatively intelligent.
Publicis Drugstore is?
Open Innovation Service. So I'm supposed to do this in real life and work with all the people in this building to help do the same thing.
So the first question is for you, not to put you on the spot or anything. But what are some of the practical applications that you're seeing now?
We spend a lot of time with startups. So the emotional intelligence thing, you kind of see every day, the way they work very closely with each other. And I think that concept of psychological safety is really interesting when you come from a big company and you see 6 or 7 people just working ridiculously hard for often you question what reason. But I suppose the thing that I find really interesting is, I probably should have sat between these two guys, but actually that idea of kind of augmentation of how are we going to use the machine to our best advantage. And someone at the Christmas party after a few drinks asked me if I was working on the Publicis AI project, which he always does every time I see him. And he said, well, what's my son going to do at 3, when he goes on to work? And I made a ridiculous comment, which was, well, he's probably going to sit in the interview with a piece in his ear, which is his personal AI, which I'll call Dave, of which has just logged all of his research, all of the things he's done in the last few years, and then he's going to sit there and go, oh, what was that report I wrote, or what's that thing I wrote? And he's going to have to interact with that and also be emotionally intelligent with the person in front of him. And how is he going to be bipolar in one situation? So to take what these guys just explained and sit there and go, how do I take all that information in at speed in 3 seconds, but also represent, synthesize, create in front of somebody in seconds? And for me, it's when you bring those two things together, that's where it starts getting interesting. I think everybody talks about automation over there, or they talk about this over there. It's like, no. We're going to bring them together. So I've seen some interesting people do that, not with the thing in their ear, but the amount of ability to bring data or information at pace and make stuff and push what I call imagination, which is above the machines. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's a good answer. Everyone okay with that? We talk about psychological safety and preparing everybody for the future of work. Martin, how can we start to prepare the people in our organizations with having the softer skills and the emotional intelligence to survive?
Wow, yeah, great questions there. Look, I think for me it's all about creating an open mindset. I mean, really all of this change is coming at us at such a pace. And it's exciting. Harry, listening to you, I found myself responding. I think, wow, what an exciting new, brave new world that we're facing, that our kids are facing, and so on. And I think what we need for that is a mindset. We need to be able to remain receptive and open, primarily, and then adaptable. People who cling to rigid ways of thinking, rigid ways of responding, are in all sorts of trouble at this moment in history, I think. And it takes a lot of emotional courage, I think, to remain open and receptive to new technology, new ideas, new ways of doing things. I clung to my facts for God knows how long. A tangible expression that you could actually pick up a piece of paper. And I think there's an extraordinary amount of courage required. So I think we need to foster this notion of psychological safety, that it's okay to embrace new challenge. It's okay to think differently. It's okay to experiment. I think we're going to need to foster a risk-taking culture. We're going to need to be far more collaborative. Gone are the days when engineers, in this information-based technology, could sit in a cubicle and close the door and invent new things. I mean, today they've got to work right across different parts of the organization. They've got to collaborate with so many different and diverse people. So in addition to technical skills and technical ability, they're going to have mature and well-developed interpersonal skills, I think, to be able to engage those people of different specializations and synthesize and lead and inspire and focus attention. So I think Dan Goldman said it. He said one of the key challenges for leadership today is management of attention. And I think we'd all agree that our attention is constantly pulled and pushed in so many different directions. And so this capacity to develop the quiet mind and settle the mind, teaching young people inside organizations the skills of mindfulness, how to focus, how to be in a relationship and be in that relationship rather than distracted, had to come from one meeting or go to another meeting and living in a watertight compartment so that we're not carrying over the contamination of the previous meeting. That's a skill, I think, that increasingly we're seeing people struggling with as they bounce their attention on information technology. So I think there's a challenge in front of us, but I'm convinced that the way forward, we know now the behavioral sciences is no longer soft. It's given us, I think, an insight into the structure of how these relationships work, how these emotional skills work, and I think we've got a bit of a blueprint. We can know how to systematically build them inside organizations to create productive cultures and collaborative cultures.
Great. And alongside that, Harry, I think we've spoken in the past about needing to have the emotional intelligence to go alongside having the technical skills. What are some of those technical skills? I think it's a very broad brush statement to say we need digital skills and technical skills. What are you seeing that is in demand at the moment, and what do you think is going to come in the future?
Well, I think you see, in particular, people who can wrangle data at the moment that's probably the hottest sort of single skill in terms of technical skill. But all of the other technical skills, in fact, even data analysis to some extent, is really about a kind of a process of logical thought and analysis. So I would say if you want to advise your children what they should be doing in terms of their education, learning that process of logical analysis is really what they need to learn. They don't need to go out and code. They don't need to go out and be data scientists. Actually, you can do that by learning a language, by learning French or German or Chinese or whatever you like. So I would say to them, don't get fixated on technology, but get fixated on how to think a problem through coherently from start to finish. But I would absolutely say, don't spend all your time doing that. Spend your time interacting with human beings, and as much as you can learn emotional intelligence, practice some of those skills that you're going to need if you're going to be emotionally intelligent to go along with your technical skills.
I'm going to open it up now because I know that we don't have a lot of time left. So if anybody has a question, lift your hand up. Otherwise, I have some other ones here. Got one over here. We've got a microphone coming.
Okay, hello. Question's really about organisational behaviours around innovation. So probably partly for Harry, but also for all three of you. I mean, in my experience, trying to drive innovation through large corporates is like banging my head against a brick wall. And the concept of them being ambidextrous, able to deliver BAU, but also integrate the change and adopt new technologies, adopt innovative practices, seems to be really difficult. At EY, you've obviously achieved some groundbreaking moves forward in tax, so it's great. But it'd be interesting just to hear, how do you balance the sort of passion to drive innovation with emotional management and not driving the CEO crazy with too much nagging?
Do you mind me asking which company you come from?
I've just left as Global Innovation Director of Arcadis.
Right.
And I've just taken on the chair of process innovation for the construction sector.
Right. Oh, interesting. Okay. I mean, it's a brilliant question and one that we're all struggling with to some extent. I mean, if you think about EY, EY has been around for 190 years, and we have a culture of not screwing things up. That's pretty important because, when you do an audit, you want to get it right. If you give people tax advice, if you give them the wrong advice, they go to jail. If you're trying to help someone buy a company, you've got to value that company correctly, otherwise they pay too much money for it. If you hand over an envelope at the Oscars, you've got to hand over the right envelope. and the reason there was so much fuss made about that is partly because it was the Oscars, but actually because it was a Big Four firm. Big Four firms do not screw things up. It doesn't happen. So how on earth do you teach somebody whose culture has eliminated anybody who screws anything up ever to be innovative? I mean, it's a really difficult problem to solve. And I think the trick really is to not try and get everybody to be innovative. I mean, it's moderately hilarious. I mean, I know where you work, and you can often see corporate executives in their corporate executive gear, touring the startups, hoping that if you put them in close proximity to a millennial, that's exactly it. And it's really not going to. In truth, for most of our people, it's really not going to. But for some of our people, they're capable of great things. So the trick is to allow those people who are capable of great innovation, great creativity, to do that, and for the rest of the organisation not to kill them. I don't mean that as a joke. That's the thing. And there are lots of ways of doing that. Probably take too long to, and then we can articulate in this conversation. But the key thing really is to have a boss. My boss is our chairman, Steve Varley, who believes this. If you have a boss who believes this, he can keep the rest of the organisation doing what the rest of the organisation needs to do, while some of his immensely talented and creative people go and do new things.
I think the thing I've learned from being young and stupid and slightly being older and in the middle now, I guess, is that you can't live on old world assumptions. So the Kodak example was they lived on an old world assumption, which is this is going to make us money forever. And then the next question is, what are the next group of people going to value? So what I value to what my dad values is very different. So why would I build a business on assumptions for my father, who's now 70? He's still worth a bit of money, still got a few years left. But the trick is, what are the assumptions we're still playing off from the past to try and create for the future? And this is why you tend to get young people playing in innovation or playing in creativity, because they're not caught up in the assumptions of the past, or they question them straight out. And it's sitting there going, to your point in your business, or for Netflix to go, yes, we have some life left in these assumptions, we have some life left in this value, what's the next piece? And you don't know 100%. So you need to be setting the business up to be able to test the next bit. And actually, I think there's kind of two ways to play culture when it comes to innovation. When we talk to innovation departments who've been doing this for a couple of years, and they've got great prototypes and they've got this great stuff, and they're like, we cannot get it through the business. We can't go to the next level. And it's like, well, that's because you didn't get everybody ready for it at the beginning. You should have said we're going to be a bit weird. It's almost like, one of our colleagues said the best comment ever. It's like, we're so set up to fail, nobody actually figured out what we do when we succeed. Yeah. And it's like, oh God, this thing's working. Now what? But then you have to realise, oh, that's fun.
It's technology for you.
Done. Yeah, so I think the layer of that is the business has to be ready. The senior, definitely. But we joke to the team and say, there's going to be a time when you have to knock on that business unit's door and say, I need resource, I need money, and I need you to take a risk. And they might not be the ones questioning the assumptions, but you kind of had to bring them on the journey with you. So you might be the team over here, but the team over here always gets put down by somebody. So the business needs to believe in it. They might not do it, but to bring that culture along, which is, we think this is going to be next, or we're going to trial this, or we want you to put resource behind this. And I tend to say there's a game of turning it from a risk into a chance. A risk sounds negative. A chance is positive, fun, engaging. And so that's why a lot of us smile and go home and cry at night, but we try and smile a lot during the day.
A bit of positive psychology.
Well, my view very quickly, that's to throw a spanner in the works from a psychology point of view. I think the problem with Kodak was not so much old world assumptions, though I can see where you're coming from. I think the problem was that it was run by a bunch of chemists. And so all they could see was film. They could only see chemicals. They couldn't see the potential of digital at all. So what you had there was a mindset that was limited. So if you think about it from an optimistic point of view, they couldn't see over the horizon and imagine the future at all, because the structure of the way they perceived the world was born of a very limited experience. And part of the danger, I think, is if you're going to hand over creativity and innovation to a bunch of specialists and say the rest of us can get on with just being methodical and business as usual, and you're in danger, I think, of that siloed mentality where you've got a bunch of reactionaries and conservative people who are constantly in tension with a bunch of creative and innovative and risk-taking people. And I think what you want is absolutely complementary skills. But when I look at the emotional intelligence framework, we look at who are the most innovative people across the businesses we work with, and we run the data on 500 people who are some of the most successful people in one of the big media companies globally. And it turned out that they scored really high on 3 skills. They turned out that they scored really well on self-actualization. So they came to work with a deep passion and love for what they do. And I think that can be true for accountants and actuaries. They just love numbers. They love solving people's problems, don't they, Harry? But they also scored really well on relationship skills and empathy. They were able to work with other people really seamlessly and therefore collaborate really effectively together. But interestingly, they did well on self-control. So to your point, Harry, I think there was that sort of method in the madness. There was some, and they were organized and systematic and disciplined. And so emotional intelligence, unlike personality, I think, is a set of competencies that you dial up to solve particular problems. And depending what the problem is you're trying to solve, and dial back other competencies to solve different problems. But having those core competencies in your skill set sets you up for extraordinary adaptability and flexibility, I think.
Thank you very much. All this works well with a corporate company, but how do you make or help governments change? Because governments have a very different agenda. They're not worried about making money or not. Yes, in theory, the country needs to make money, but in reality, they're worried about votes. They're worried about their political party. That goes across different countries. It doesn't apply only to the UK, where everybody's focused on Brexit and what's going to happen next year. But it applies to my country. I'm from Mexico, and of course, we have presidential election later on this year, and everybody's focused on a different thing. How can you help that transition take place in a country at a government level?
Well, funnily enough, I was talking just yesterday morning to the person who's responsible for setting up this a new government advisory group is being set up to answer that question. How do we deal with all of this technology? How do we deal with data, and how do we deal with the issues that it brings? So I've been thinking about this quite recently. And actually, I think it's how do you persuade anybody of anything? You try to, you don't give them lots of facts and logical argument. You try to figure out how it will tap into their emotions and make them happy, basically, and make them feel good about themselves. So governments do care a lot about votes, and politicians care a lot about votes, and civil servants care a lot about the country and the citizens in that country. And so taking arguments about policy and turning them into those two, in using those two arguments really are probably the ones that matter. So you use different arguments with the politicians than you will use with the civil servants. But I mean, put bluntly, the argument for politicians right now is if you don't understand the switch the economy is going through, your people will become impoverished over the next few years, and they're probably going to vote for that other demagogue who promises them jam tomorrow with no cost. No particular country intended there. But, you know, so actually, if you're a politician right now, understanding this issue and doing smart things about it is probably very important to your chances of getting re-elected in the next couple of elections.
So if you could leave everybody here with one thought, one sentence around the future of work, what would it be? Each of you.
Me? Look, for me, Adam Smith, you know, if you take out a £20 note, you'll see his face on the front of it, and he's regarded as the father, you know, of our modern economic system. But 200 years ago, he suggested that the economy, the market, wasn't driven by raw self-interest at all. Everybody misinterpreted his second book to suggest that. In his first book, A Theory of Moral Sentiments, he made it absolutely clear that markets are driven by focusing on people's happiness. If you really understand what makes people happy, if you understand what drives their sentiments, what they feel, and what they're trying to achieve, and you can speak to those needs and provide them with products and services that are going to enhance and augment those needs, that is fundamentally what drives markets. And I think that's exciting. You know, we know more about that these days than we have before. So we've got no more excuses, I think.
Well, I can't remember who said this, but somebody, one of the Silicon Valley tech giants, said once that if you want to build the future, you've got to love the future. And I think that's absolutely right. And I think you have to be optimistic about the future and how it can turn out. So my one thought would be, don't be scared of this technology and what it might bring. Be optimistic about it and use that optimism to try and bring about a future you love.
Nice.
Sorry for making you go last. You're late to the party.
So when I was a kid, I went to a military school, and there was either really big, tough, sporty guys, or there was a few really smart guys in the corner that nobody kind of, you know, talked to, except for me, because I wanted a job when I was older. And I remember reading Charles Darwin's, it's not the strongest or the smartest that will survive, it's the one that's the most adaptable to change. And I've lived by that my entire life. I change on a minute-by-minute basis, depending on who I'm talking to, which is probably a bit weird. But I actually think that's now a skill set And, any one week, we could be in a country, we could be with a different team, or I could be learning about MSL's work on 1 minute or whatever. And, my team and stuff are like this every single minute of every single day. And I just think it's a skill set that is already being useful. And I think it's the next layer where, you've got your IQ, you've got your EQ, and the next question they're asking is, how can you adapt? So I would be about learning how to adapt and then practicing, getting it wrong a million times, and then kind of constantly trying to make yourself adapt on what you think might be next that you're optimistic about.
Well, I think that wonderfully sums up the evening. I wanted to say a big thank you to everyone that came tonight, and a big round of applause, please, for our panel.